So yeah, today we're going to be talking about expanding AirWatch UEM to macOS. Right? And a lot of our customers have challenges in managing macOS purely and simply because they don't have the history that they have when they start to look at their traditional laptop estate. So my name's Oliver Ford. I'm a principal EUC specialist. I've been with VMware AirWatch for 6 years now. Anybody that knows anything about AirWatch and its history and where we came from is effectively we have the thing in the UK where 1 human year is the equivalent of 7 dog years. So therefore we apply that to AirWatch as the pace of change, right? So I've done 35 years, which is quite nice, which makes me a bit of a master. I'll hand over to my colleague here to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so my name's Joe McDonald. I'm a systems engineer at VMware. Worked at the organization for just coming into my 5th year. So much like Ollie, we're kind of touching on the 35-year basis. I specialize in macOS and kind of wear a hat as an Apple champion within our organization. So a lot of the time I get to present to people like yourselves, talk to Apple and engage and help the message get across.
So just out of interest, who has deployed macOS in their environment today? Has it managed, locked down, secure? Okay. And what's the reception like? The reception amongst your colleagues is good, right? They enjoy the experience. How many people are looking at deploying macOS in their environment and building out that framework? Okay. So there's a bit of a dichotomy around how do we manage it, because when you start to look at the traditional estate, it's locked down, it's joined to domains, there's all sorts of challenges there. So when you look to embrace macOS, you're going to hit some of these challenges and some of these issues. And we'll talk through today how we can simplify that, how we can increase the agility and reduce the friction around things like application consumption and single sign-on. Before we get into that, mandatory disclaimer, some of the information in this deck is forward-looking, so I appreciate the fact that, depending on market forces, it may or may not make it into the product. But the net of it is that everything we've got in the messaging today, is the direction of the product and where we're heading. So this has been our mantra for many, many years now, right? Which is that we want to reduce the friction from the end user perspective. We want to make things consumer simple. But at the same time as well, we want to provide intelligence around the security aspect so that you're confident that what you're pushing out to your end users and your colleagues works, is functional, is easy to consume, but at the same time is secure from an IT perspective. And this has always been a challenge, right? Nobody in the room really likes 2FA, right? Because it's a challenge. You sit there and you think, I need to sign into something, so you've got to pull keys out of your pocket and put numbers in, right? And it interferes with that end user experience. Now, we're not saying 2FA doesn't have a place. What we're saying is there are other ways that we can reduce friction. Same time as well, it's not just around policies and configuration. You've got the whole life cycle to think about. So it's a platform that gives you the intelligence around the life cycle that will break out some of the data that you typically can't find, right, around the device health and various other pieces. And again, using our intelligence framework, it extends that into other applications. So we're not just a sandbox of data, right? We play nicely with other applications. We're part of that infrastructure layer that means you can expand out some of the features and functionality into your existing ecosystem, such as service desks. And again, we'll look at that in a bit more detail. But really, when we start to think about this, macOS as a whole and managing these devices, it isn't just applications. It's not just configuration. It's all the pieces that come together. It's the onboarding experience. It's how do I get a machine to somebody? How do I manage that machine through the life cycle? And there's also the offboarding at the end of the process, right? So there's a lot to consider and a lot to think about. And this is a really good slide. This kind of talks about, as a whole, from an IT perspective, what the current landscape looks like today and where, getting to that Workspace ONE utopic scenario of where everyone's laying on the beach and they're enjoying Kool-Aid in the sun. How do you get there? What are all the challenges? And we've put an awful lot of work and effort across our entire portfolio to understand those challenges and give you guys the right tools in the box to be able to pull them out and apply them to certain situations, and at the same time reduce that kind of pain threshold in embracing that modern management framework. And there's a big change right now, right? The whole industry is going through this business transformation in terms of moving to cloud, managing from the cloud, and increasing the agility and the security frameworks around deploying applications and securing them on devices. I'll hand over to you with regards to the modern management side.
Thank you. Okay, so a little bit about why modern management is important from our side. So Mojave dropped this year. We have normal mode and we have dark mode. Now, our project line manager, and this is kind of in honor of him, the presentation is now going to take place in dark mode. So yeah, we'll be presenting in black. Okay, so modern management really, and you will hear this terminology a lot, and it's spoken about a lot at this event. We talk about millennials, and we talk about how this group of users is shaping the way that us as a business has to redesign the way we think. Now, I myself am a millennial. I'm part of a group of users that are now transforming the way we work. And statistically, if we look at it, in the US workforce at the moment, there are over 33% of employees fill this gap. Now, in 10 years, globally, they estimate that 75% of workers will be millennials. Now, you may be thinking kind of, why is this important? Now, as one myself, as I kind of stated, I grew up with a term that we kind of refer to as like instant gratification. I didn't have to wait to, a delivery to be ordered. I could go to a website, order something, it'll be delivered the next day. I could pause and rewind and stop TV. I could go to a shop and buy whatever I want, and it's there with me, which we kind of needed to transition into the business. And when we look at how the business can transform, we have to provide choice to users. As someone who's grown up with a MacBook through my education, I didn't want to transition to maybe another platform because it's what my organization wanted. We needed to find a way to offer Mac as choice so that I could continue to grow and expand on what I've already learned. We have to break down these corporate barriers as well. So no longer are users restricted to this one area. We don't sit at a desk in an office behind a corporate perimeter. We have this flexible way of working where I should be able to work wherever I want, whether that's in a coffee shop, at a friend's house, or in an airport where I spend most of my time. We talk about simplicity, the access to any application, and this kind of ties in with the possibility of enablement and learning. It's mentioned that millennials want to continue to learn and enable themselves. They don't want to go to a help desk and ask for help. They don't want to be reliant upon someone else. They want to be able to do it themselves. So if we can enable them with self-service possibilities, if we can allow them to sort of expand on their own knowledge that they have, it's going to be a insightful thing for your organization to suggest. And then finally, we touch on privacy. Whilst a MacBook is a device that I'm going to use in my corporate environment, there's still needs and necessities for me to use it outside. So we need to be able to silo off that personal and corporate container and make sure that it works how we need it to. So the macOS landscape is changing. A few of you guys have already said that you've deployed macOS. Some of you are looking to do it. And the reason behind that really is because user preference is driving macOS adoption. We're seeing more and more customers, especially in the enterprise, that are looking at macOS now as a choice, where we need to really rethink the ways that we're working. When we look at macOS as a choice, there's a few key points that we're going to talk about. Statistically, or a recent survey, should I say, showed that 1 in 4 Windows users is expectant to go to Mac if given the choice. And then of those users that are going to transition to Mac, there's a 98% retention rate of those users. What you're able to do here is, increase productivity and satisfaction within your users by giving them a device that they want to work on. On the flip side of that, there are 600 million Windows 7 devices that are going to be going end of life in 2020. It's a fantastic opportunity in time to be able to transition and move into a Mac as choice program, because what are you going to do with those legacy devices as they go end of life? Now, when we talk about iOS, it's kind of binary in a sense. It was either a managed device or it was unmanaged. If it was managed, we can push down profiles, we can push down VPN configurations, apps, we can do what we need. If it's unmanaged, we can't do that. So it's either managed or not. But when we talk about macOS, traditionally there was no right or wrong way to manage these devices. There was no standard definition, if you like, as to how we were going to do this. Some people would image it, you would push down a package with your apps, you would have your plists and config files to manipulate the way that those applications behaved or how the device behaved, and it kind of worked. But as we transition into this modern management world, MDM has actually been around on macOS for several years. With the introduction of macOS 10, you can see that we had some very basic sort of MDM protocols built into the operating system. And then as the years kind of transpired and as we moved forward, you can see, for me most notably, the introduction of DEP and VPP that was introduced in 2013. As we move through, the big changing point and maybe the catalyst to modern management is High Sierra. When High Sierra dropped last year, it gave us the possibility, or Apple changed the way we work so that the file system had been changed. This made imaging challenging. By no means are we saying that imaging isn't possible, but it's a very difficult thing to do now. So the idea is that rather than imaging your machines, we look to modern protocols to manage these devices. And you can see by the curve, when High Sierra came in, MDM started going up, and obviously the legacy tools or the old ways of working dropped. Mojave dropped this year, which gave us some additional functionality, some user functionality, some corporate stuff that we're going to be leveraging. Obviously, dark mode, as you can see with the presentation. But more importantly, the redesign of the App Store. So we've already seen companies like Microsoft and Adobe announcing that they're going to be publishing some of their core applications to the store. This is going to allow us to leverage modern management tools like the volume purchase program and device enrollment to get those apps onto those devices and manage them securely. There's a multi-year project to port over some iOS devices or iOS apps onto macOS. And the reasoning behind this is by no means are we saying that iOS and macOS are the same, but they do share familiar frameworks, if that makes sense. So by the end of 2018, we will see some important apps hitting the App Store for us, and then we can transition through. So when we rethink the way we're going to work, there's really three bubbles that we're kind of silo ourselves into. We have our deployment and provisioning. How are we going to deploy these devices to users who, A, no longer sit in an office, who are working from home? How can we get those devices to them? And this is where using Apple Business Manager with device enrollment is a super flexible way to transition that workflow for you. When we provision these devices, we need to use over-the-air management tools to be able to push down the right profiles to these devices and make sure that they're able to do what we need them to. When we look at the configuration and app side, this is where tools and programs like volume purchase can come in. We have our own integration of Monkey baked into our console, which we'll talk about later, which allows us to really sort of hone in on those internal applications and distribute them in a way that we never were possible or wasn't possible before. And then we wrap it around with this fabric of identity. How do we make sure that the right user is accessing that application at the right time? And not only that, how do we make sure that we're not going to get any unauthorized access to it? So this is kind of how we see macOS within Workspace ONE and at VMware. So MDM is at its core. What we mean by this is we want to leverage the MDM protocols that are in place, and this is what we're going to build our platform on. We then have these layered services, agents if you like, tools like Puppet, Santa, Nomad, even our own AirWatch agent or Workspace ONE agent. And then finally, that bubble of identity that wraps itself around everything that we're going to do to make sure, like I say, that the right person is accessing the right apps on that device at any given time. Now, I'm going to transition back over to Ollie to talk a little bit about how we do this. Thank you.
Cool. So like I said at the very beginning, it's all about an infrastructure framework, right? And this is important because when you look at the management tools that you've got for the device, you've got a series of challenges, which is how do I get this enabled? How do I get it up and running? And then how do I monitor and maintain it? And the intelligence estate, you're going to see more and more information come out around our capability here. There's a lot of work and effort going into the intelligence framework because it gives you insights and at the same time automates, heals, and remediates a lot of the challenges you're going to face over the next few years. So, there's a big play around this estate because purely and simply it gives us the value that we previously didn't have in understanding what the end user was doing on the device. When you look at the MDM framework, and Joe's right, I personally worked on one of the first ever macOS deployments back in 2013. So that's a long time ago, right? So we've been managing Mac machines for 5 years plus now, all in the modern management framework way, right? So we've got 5 years experience, we've had 5 years of challenges in terms of what we can flip bits-wise on machines and what we need to do from a reporting perspective. So it's a really well-baked solution today because we've learned from customer feedback and also customers have come back to us and said, hey, it'd be great if we could adopt certain processes in order to make things work. The other nice thing about this, and everybody wants to be able to do this today, is consume kind of a device as a service or ship to the end user style model. And when you look at the changes that Apple have made to that framework over the last few years, it's easier and easier to be able to ship a device to the end user and never have to pre-stage it or see it inside the IT infrastructure, right? The IT organization, sorry. The net of that is you reduce a whole bunch of costs associated to it, but it means that you can be more agile. And again, we have a lot of workers that work remotely. I work personally with a lot of customers that have people out in the field, and those guys never go into the office. Personally, I've only ever been into the Milton Keynes office, which is my office, 4 times this year. Right? 4 times I've been into that office, but yet my machine's up to date because everything happens over the air. And that's the kind of agility that you want because you want a workforce that's able to transact where they need to without having to worry about the burdens of IT, right? So if you need to ship a new policy, over the air. You need to add a new application, over the air. On top of this as well, when you start to look at what we can do with macOS, and this was always an interesting challenge, right? Inside the AirWatch console, you used to be able to go in there and you could see all the different device types, right? Operating system types, and hover over them. And I always used to turn around to people and say, watch this. You'd hover over iOS and there'd be a whole bunch of stuff you could do, and there was a lot. And then you go to macOS and there'd be even more. And people would sit there and they'd go, I didn't know you could do all this stuff with macOS. And the net of that is that if you have root access to the machine remotely, you have complete access to the machine, right? You're able to do pretty much anything you want to. The outcome of that is that we have a whole bunch of, obviously, services that we've baked in as part of that MDM stack. We've added in additional value around things like ADCS integration so you can distribute certificates out there. And again, that's effective because you can take advantage of all the things like key rotation and all the good stuff that comes with ADCS. So again, making it more secure. But from an end user perspective, because you're using certificates, it's invisible to them. They don't have to go through this whole kind of password reset process every 28 days. Can't remember the last 3 passwords that I've used previously, and nobody really likes that experience. So having that kind of agility around managing those application access is important as well. And it's a large framework. There's a lot of partners that we have in this space as well to help extend that out. But at the same time as well, when you start to look at things like encryption, do you want to enable File Vault 2 on a device? Do you want to make sure it's encrypted? Do you want to escrow the keys into the Workspace ONE UEM console so that when you get a service desk call, you can just read it out to the end user? These are the important processes and part of that life cycle. Same time as well, our agent's been in existence now for, like I say, over 5 years. So again, we've been through that pain point of understanding what we could do, what we couldn't do, and we've enabled a lot more additional services and functionality over those 5 years to ensure that we can do pretty much everything we need to, including pushing down things like scripts, running scripts, sending attributes back to consoles, things like antivirus, making sure it's patched, right, remotely. These sort of challenges are what IT faces every day. So if you can push down a script that will return back to the console exactly what version of an antivirus product the end user is using on their machine or what definition, this is important because then you can report against it and you can find out what risk you've got associated to those devices. Tunnel's important. Per app VPN is a massive part of every organization to reduce the friction around end users having to spin up VPNs on their own. And that goes one step further, which is a lot of customers that I've been speaking to over the last year are saying, yeah, you're right, zero trust is the model we want to get to. We want to get to this point where everybody is the same citizen, whether they're on LAN or off LAN. Application consumption is identical, but we've got 20 years of network security, which is like a bowl of spaghetti that we can't untangle, right, to make that process easier. And we understand we want to get to a lasagna where everything's all nice and layered, but it's going to take us time. Per app VPN helps close that gap because from an end user perspective, you launch an application, it launches the VPN, they don't see this stuff happen in the background. And then as time goes on and you build out that zero trust model more and more and more, you'll probably start dropping tunnel off of those services. But again, it's a great way to be able to consume the back-end services on a device without the end user having to invoke those tunnel style or VPN style processes. Again, the bootstrapping side of things, so integration with existing tools is important. macOS as a whole is a community, right? If you look at a lot of the tools in that community, they're open source. They were developed by Mac admins that required a method in order to be able to, fulfill an obligation somewhere or manage a certain series of devices. So from our perspective, again, it's playing nice in the sandbox, right? It's not creating this closed door world. We want to play with all those services that everybody knows and loves and embrace that community because it's super powerful in terms of the IP that's created in the open source projects that are out there. From an access perspective, there's a couple of videos on this actually. So we're going to walk through what identity means. And actually the power of identity really kind of transforms how you look at applications and how they're consumed and also how you do the reporting aspects, but also some of the automation. And this all really dovetails up nicely into the kind of intelligence estate. So from a single sign-on perspective, again, this is always a challenge. Don't take single sign-on away from me, by the way. When I was in AirWatch originally, and Andrew, you'll remember these days, right? We had password managers to manage the amount of back-end points that we needed to hit. It was a nightmare because none of those passwords could be the same. They all had to be different because if I get compromised once, I've been compromised everywhere. The net of that is every time you went to a website or had to log in somewhere, you had to fire up an application first to find out. Now all I have to do is look at my phone. It's like a day and night transition, right? So why can't we embrace that on macOS? And on macOS as well, at the same time, there are challenges around how you do things like Kerberos, right? Because you require the device to be plugged into a domain and logged in order to get that ticket generation. And again, we can help with some of those processes around single sign-on, reducing the friction, reducing the barrier. Spinning up new applications is super simple as well. You know, you just go in there, you add an application into the estate, you choose and identify what the application needs to use in terms of authentication, and then you can publish this out to your end users. Now on macOS, you've got exactly the same as you've got with the rest of the kind of Workspace ONE estate. You've got a built-in native client, which we'll look at in a bit more detail, and then you've got the web browser interface as well. So you could be at home on your iMac in your office and fire up the browser and get access to services, whereas your laptop sits in the bag because you don't need to get access to, you know, those high-value assets in terms of security and confidentiality. So we're going through here, we're publishing Dropbox out there. You can see Dropbox is now inside the Workspace ONE UI. And from an end user perspective, they can consume that application with a single click. It's that seamless, right? It's a beautiful landscape in terms of reducing the friction around things like VPNs and all the other good stuff. Same thing with conditional access. So conditional access gives us the controls to know, you know, where you are and what you're doing in terms of accessing those applications. We can build out this estate, we can choose the authentication protocols, we can fall back to authentication protocols if certain ones fail. So again, think about your estate. Do you want to authenticate with a certificate? You can do that on your corporate device, but on your iMac that's unmanaged at home, you're not going to have that certificate, so you can fall back to maybe a two-factor process. So again, not every application is the same citizen, but also not every machine is the same citizen. So straight away, you can build out these rules to meet what you consider to be your appetite for risk around the security and the consumption of those applications. And we see this all the time, right? You know, Skype for Business, is that a secured application or is it an unsecured application? Would you allow somebody to run that from their own iMac at home, for instance? So when I said earlier on that, you know, intelligence extends out this framework. So we've got the identity piece done, we've got the access piece done, we know the machine's managed, we know it's got all its applications, and we've done all this over the air by shipping the device to the end user. Right, it's beautiful. At this point, IT haven't seen it. They know that the end user's got it. DEP has allowed us to do the enrollment and out-of-box experience, and VPP has pushed down all those applications that you need to pay for, and you've got all the reporting around the licenses side. But actually, intelligence then extends out the framework because this is now where you get into the life cycle of the machine. So you can jump straight into intelligence. You can say, you know what, actually, I'm interested in building out a few graphs and widgets to understand what things like application consumption looks like, application installation. What versions of macOS are out there and deployed at the moment and used by my end users. And the value here is the fact that we escrow all this data up into a console. You can go in there and build out your own queries, custom queries, in real time, and then you decide how you want to format and display that information, whether it's a chart, whether it's a graph, whether it's a donut ring, whether it's a list of information. And the nice thing about here is you get all that history as well. So you can turn around and say, okay, we need to push out the latest version of Adobe Acrobat, for instance. Right? What was our adoption rate like last time? How long did it take for us to get it out to all of our users? And therefore, if you're in a scenario like change freeze, you can pre-plan this before you push out that application. You can understand how long it takes to adopt it and therefore build your IT infrastructure around that time period, as opposed to you throw it out and you've got no idea. Right? You hope that it's been applied, but you're not 100% certain, right? With Workspace ONE UEM, you get the visibility to see that. You can see that inside the Workspace ONE UEM console, and then you can jump over into intelligence and see what that looked like over time. So it gives you that really nice framework. Likewise as well, I mean, here's a classic one, right? So we're looking in there and we're saying, okay, if it's a Mac machine, and it's got Adobe Reader on it, and it's version 15, what we need to do is we need to build out a rule, which is to remove that application because we consider it to be insecure for whatever reason from the end user's device. And we're going to do that automatically because now we're extending out into webhooks into Workspace ONE UEM. But also at the same time, who wants a machine where you turn up in the morning, you open it up, an application disappears and you've not had a notification? So what we'll do here is we'll hook into a Slack channel and we'll trigger via API a message to the end user to say, hey, we've removed this application from your device because we consider it to be insecure. So that's the life cycle, that's the journey model. The end user just sees the application disappear, they get a message to say why, right? And they're happy, they understand the process. It reduces burden on help desk calls and at the same time gives you the agility to be able to trigger reactions based on the security that you're seeing out there. And like I say, intelligence has got a fantastic roadmap. If you've not seen any of those sessions, I recommend you do, purely and simply because you're going to see that functionality just extend and extend and extend. And you could trigger some of these webhooks yourselves if you understand, the technology of the webhook side of things, what needs to be sent and received. But at the same time, we're going to be building out our framework around a lot of those endpoints that we see people come to us and request access to and automation in. So all in all, I mean, and this is really the biggest takeaway, it doesn't matter what device you're looking at, whether it's an iPhone or whether it's macOS, it's all about the application estate, right? Apple have done a fantastic job in terms of the format, the looks, the feels, the aesthetics, the OS, but the net of it is without applications, there's not much use in these devices. So the application estate is around being able to embrace all different types of application, because again, as you look at transitioning away from that legacy desktop environment or laptop environment, there are going to be challenges around applications. Everybody's moving to the cloud in a different level of cadence. Some are quite slow because they need to be, because it's highly restrictive or whatever it is. But the net of it is that you've got a tool that you can pull out the box to help embrace these devices in your ecosystem. And that's really what Workspace ONE is all about, right? It is that infrastructure layer to be able to take that device's choice, to have the Mac as choice, to be able to embrace the latest functionality, whether it's in macOS 10 or whether it's in iOS 12, right? It's bringing it together from an end user perspective and giving them an environment, an infrastructure that they can have the freedom of choice to be able to make these decisions themselves. And I said at the beginning, well, a little bit earlier on in this section, that we have a client as well, a native client for macOS. And again, this is important because it gives us parity with all the other platforms. And actually, I live in this world. My VMware day lives inside the Workspace ONE client. And the reason for that is it's single-click access to things. I don't have to fire up my password managers. I don't need to worry about all the different endpoints. I've got this beautiful catalog of all the applications I have access to. I choose the ones that I'm interested in. And with a single click, tap, launch, I get access to them. And again, it just makes my life super simple in terms of understanding what I need to get access to and what I want to consume from an application estate. And with a single click, I get access to those applications. And even here, look, virtualizing. So virtualizing Visio is a virtual app. So again, remember, that traditional estate, you're going to have challenges managing some of the applications. Virtualize them. Right? Horizon does a fantastic job of virtualizing applications, so now you can deliver those traditional kind of applications to macOS without having to think about the burden of what the end user is going to experience. But over time, there's an opportunity to transition to something different in terms of the application. We see a lot of applications that are Win32 based that have been around for 15 years, they haven't been updated, and they're looking at embracing a cloud version of that application, but it takes time. And this gives you an opportunity to embrace macOS as a device of choice before you think about the application estate. So I'm going to hand back to Joe to kind of wrap up the session today and go into what's new and what we're looking at today and what you'll be able to embrace as well.
Thank you. Okay, so from a what's new perspective, what's important for us, and kind of Ollie alluded to this as well, the Workspace ONE application that we're building out, it's a native application on macOS. And we're really trying to build it so this is this cool tool that users want to use. If we're trying to direct users to this single portal, this single platform where they can access all their applications, as Ollie said, whether it's native, SaaS, or maybe virtual if we need to bridge that gap, it needs to be an application that they want to use. Now, as an extension to this, I kind of alluded a little bit that we integrated in with Monkey. This was something that was announced at VMworld in 2017. And what this has given us the possibility to do is to be able to add applications from a sort of renowned tool that's used in the Mac community. Something that we pride ourselves on is we're going out into the community and looking at tools that are being used by Mac admins, and we're trying to integrate those into our systems to make it as easy as possible for administrators like yourself. On the flip side of that, we also need to make it usable so that maybe someone who isn't familiar with macOS management is going to be able to add those applications in and understand some of the terminology that exists. So the first thing that's new is starting with pause and resume. So this is a feature that we've built on top of traditional Monkey, and it gives us the possibility to allow a user to either pause the download, or in some instances, if you were to drop off the network, what you're able to do is not lose your progress and then resume back from where you are. Now, it may not seem like a big thing, but if you take an application like Word or one of the Office Suite apps, they're big files. They're like 3.5 gig. If that was to stop halfway through and you had to re-download it, that's not going to be a joyous experience for the user. So by being able to assume the pause and resume, as soon as the network comes back on, that application will re-download itself or re-continue, and the user can have a good day. Now, a benefit for administrators is if you push an application to a device, that application is somehow or another going to be on that user's machine. The next announcement is optional desired state management. So as an administrator, you push an application down to a macOS device, you want to make sure that app is going to stay on the device. Desired state management is a little flag that we're able to enable that means that the user would not be able to remove that application, and you can decide where it stays. And then the final monkey integration we have is blocking apps. So this is a really important one. So if we take maybe Word as an example here, a user's working on the Office suite and an update comes through from the console and they're going to have to update that application. Without a tool like this, what's going to happen is Word's just going to shut down and they're going to lose their work and it's going to update the package in the back end. Blocking apps allows us to be able to notify the user, to say to them that they can have a deferral rate if they want, maybe up to 30 days or so, and they have the possibility to update that application when they want. You can inject in your own application, so if we talk about Word again, if you were to have PowerPoint and Excel as a dependency, what's going to happen is as long as those applications are open, this application isn't going to update itself. So you can really give the user the power and control to update those apps as and when they need. Transitioning on to certificate management, we now support SCEP renewal. So we can do the full PKI lifecycle with a SCEP as a CA. So this is the issuing of a certificate, the renewal of a certificate, and then the revocation of that certificate as well. And it ties in really nicely with the next announcement, which is the possibility to allow access to applications. Now, natively on Mac, if you were to deploy a SCEP certificate, and if we take an internet site or an internal site as an example, if a user wanted to use that certificate to auto sign in into a website, we weren't able to assign that SCEP cert to that particular app. So we've gone through and we've designed a way that we're able to now assign that particular certificate to an application like Safari, where a user can access an internal site as they would want to, and it's going to be seamless. Now this ties in super nice with our next announcement, which was also announced earlier this year at an event called Octane. We partnered with Okta this year to give a best-in-breed user experience, also security as well. And what we're able to do with this is to take advantage of their IDP against our conditional access and really give your users the best experience when it comes to identity management and access management. If we look at how that looks, if you take an application like Salesforce, I'm a user on my MacBook or my iOS device. Again, it doesn't matter what device I choose here. As I select that application, I'm taken through to Okta, who's going to do IDP discovery. Once Okta has determined what that application is, if it's a critical application to your estate, we have the possibility to send it through to Workspace ONE and look at its conditional access or the device posturing. Maybe that device isn't managed, or maybe that device is managed. Do you want to manage this application in such a way that if the device is unmanaged, you can prompt your users so that they can enroll the device and we can guide them through that? Or do you maybe want to just block access altogether? If the device is managed, but it isn't encrypted, do you want to inform the user they have to encrypt their device before that application will be allowed to be used? Once they've gone past those checks and we've made sure that it's gone through right, we can then pass it back to Okta, which will then go back to Workspace ONE, and the user is in seamlessly. Now, from a user perspective, like Ollie said, they're just clicking on an application, but in the background, all these checks are taking place to make sure that the right people are getting in at the right time. Something we've been waiting for a while was the deferral of operating system updates. And with iOS and macOS this year, we have now an up to 90-day deferral that we can put in place. What we're able to do here is if we were to push a profile down from the console, it allows us to defer that update. And in this case, we've referenced 15 days. Now, when the user goes into the App Store, there's no reference here that there's a later version of the operating system for them to download. An extension to that is we have the possibility to deploy specific patches or updates. So if I was to go into a user's device within the console, I can go and have a look at the OS updates or patches that are available, and I can distribute those to that user's device specifically on a one-on-one basis. Now we're giving admins the opportunity to download and install these, to download and not install, to allow the user to download and install. It's a flexible way of you distributing operating system updates to those users. And then once you're happy that the operating system has been pushed down, all the user's going to have to do is go back into the App Store. They'll get a notification that says the update has been applied, and they can either restart their machine or they can start that download and go through what they need to do. So nice and easy. So to tie back to the sort of initial slides that we were talking about, why Workspace ONE for macOS management? The way we see it, it's a single tool for all your endpoints within your estate. In our eyes, macOS and iOS is a fantastic extension, but we appreciate that there may be more to the piece or to the puzzle. With modern macOS management at its foresight, and with our goal to use MDM protocols as our initial building block, we have the possibility to expand and grow with Apple as these MDM protocols expand and as we grow. That Workspace ONE user experience for users. Now, as Ollie said, I use Workspace ONE every single day. I can't get away from it. I'm either on my phone or on my device, my Mac. It's a place that I want to go, and it's a place that I'm familiar with. By having a single application that I can use across all my devices, there's no harm in me trying to find where I need to go because I already know where that application is going to be. It's the same bookmarks, it's the same catalog, it's the same feel. It gives me that possibility to do what I need. And then finally, that app gap is solved. We don't touch on it too much, but in the possibility that we need to bridge the gap with virtualization, that possibility to bring it into the catalog, to give that user that native feel, and to just have an experience as you would expect them to have on a device like a Mac, is something that we really pride ourselves on. Now, there's a few resources around that you guys can take advantage of. So there's some demos being done in the solutions booth. We have the Apple DP Bootstrap package. You want to take the QR codes. There's a whole section in Test Drive. So if any of you are familiar with our Test Drive platform, there's a possibility for you to go and experience all of this hands-on. You have full access to Workspace ONE, full access to our modern management tools, and full access to sort of integrate it into your systems. And then we've got our POC and deployment guides that talk you through how we do this, why we do this, and things that we've learned from and how we've deployed. Now, we couldn't really stand here and do this if it wasn't for the macOS community, and we wanted to give a shout out to them because they've really helped us on our journey of macOS management when we started. We play an avid part in the macOS Slack group, so if any of you are part of the Mac admin group, you'll see us and our product line managers there. We take on feedback and we answer questions and help people transition with their journeys from whatever platform over to macOS. But our product line management team are also on local podcasts. They're there to listen and announce what we're doing and talk to the world, because macOS as a community is really tight-knit, and we're trying extremely hard to sort of integrate in and build that into the Workspace ONE story. Now, there's a few other things that we take advantage of, which is such like our VMUG sessions, so the VMware user group, the possibility for us to go on and talk to customers like yourself about the direction of the product, why we're doing these things. And it's a fantastic opportunity for you as well to be able to network with other organizations and admins that are doing the same things as you. You may be stuck with a concept and there's someone who's already done it before. So by attending VMUG groups, it gives you the possibility to learn and expand within your own organizations. Now, I have to say this one apparently, so please do not forget to fill out the survey at the end of the session. And there's a few other announcements we just want to make as well. So at 12:30 in hall CC4, I believe it is, we have a Apple lunch on. Now, what this is it's going to be a platform or a forum for you guys to engage directly with Apple, who we have in the room today. It's going to be a presentation on why macOS is choice from their side, and then there's going to be a few demos from our side just to give you an idea again of how we sort of integrate in and play nicely with those devices. A fantastic opportunity for you to come and meet and greet Apple and ask them any questions you may have. Anything additional you want to add?
Yeah, and we'll take Q&A off stage here as well. So if anybody's got any burning questions that they want to ask now as opposed to wait for that luncheon, we'll happily take Q&A off stage at the end here. And like I said, the folks from Apple are here today, so they'll help answer some of those questions that are more on the OS side of things. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your time, and hopefully this was interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.